Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some homemade sourdough naan with a lamb meatball soup with sweet potatoes and kind of like a pumpkin broth to it and some pumpkin brown sugar cookies. So let's start by making the dough for our naan because remember it needs to sit and hydrate for a little bit before we start cooking it up. So we are going to start with 1 cup of sourdough discard. So I have some sourdough discard in here because I had to feed it up earlier and I didn't want to get rid of it. So I just put it in another one. But we want a whole cup of sourdough discard. Again, this is a great recipe to use when you've got like a lot of discard you need to get rid of. So we've got 1 cup of our discard. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of yogurt or sour cream. I use both kind of interchangeable for this recipe. I actually have plain yogurt here, so we'll use some yogurt, but sour cream works great as well for those who don't have plain yogurt. We're going to do a half a cup. That's a little, maybe a spoonful more. It's about a half a cup. And we'll give these a little mix. Let me forgot my oil over here, so let me grab it real quick. And then we're going to want about a 1/4 cup of olive oil. And you could use any oil, but I'm going to be using olive oil. And then we're going to mix these wet ingredients together to kind of mix them up. And then we'll add in our baking powder and baking soda. And then last, our flour. But let's mix these well, kind of incorporate them. And then I do need to add in 6 tablespoons of water as well. Here we go. And then 6 tablespoons of water is the same as 90 milliliters. Grab that right over here. Forgot to fill it up beforehand, but we've got our water in here. We're going to mix it up, and then we're going to put in 2 teaspoons of baking powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and then 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt. Here we go. Just again, making sure all the wet ingredients get mixed together really well. So 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So 1, and do a little bit more. That had a little pocket in it. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. And these are what is going to give a puff to our little naan here. Since there's no yeast in it and the sourdough discard isn't used for leavening, it's more just used as a way to kind of use our extra discard and adds kind of just a great texture and flavor. And then we want 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt. This is my 1/2 teaspoon, so I'm just going to put 3 of them in there. We're going to mix these ingredients up, and you want to make sure you get all that baking powder and baking soda mixed into our mixture before we add in our flour. And then we'll do our kneading with our flour because it's going to make a nice kind of dough that it's got a little bit of a slight stick to it, but it isn't so wet that you can't work with it. But as you see, when you add your baking powder and baking soda, it makes the batter very, very fluffy here, which is just absolutely like lovely because that's going to lead to, again, a nice fluffy naan. And then we're going to add in 3 cups of flour. So we're just going to use an all-purpose flour here. So 1, 2, and need to remember to refill my bucket. There we go. So 3 cups of our flour. We're going to mix this together, and this should make a nice kind of, again, soft batter with a slight stick, but it shouldn't stick to your hands. And we'll knead it a couple of times, form it into a ball. And then the key is before you start cooking it up, you've got to let it sit for about 5-10 minutes, 15 minutes, to where it hydrates the flour. And there, that way, when you roll it out, it stretches nicely and it doesn't break. It's going to give you a nice, better texture on it. And then again, a nicer end product. And all it is just letting it sit and letting that flour kind of rehydrate from the water and the discard and the sour cream. Okay, so now I've got it pretty much basically mixed together. I'm going to flip this out on our counter here. As you can see, it's kind of, a loosely formed, and we're going to knead it together into a nice kind of ball. Just get off all of that. Don't want to waste any of this. And you're just going to work it together. And again, it's going to be slightly sticky. It's not too sticky though.
You have a question? What if you don't have sourdough discard?
If you don't have sourdough discard, you can use a mixture of, flour and water to kind of make up for it, but you might honestly go to a completely different recipe. If you're interested in starting a sourdough journey, I do have recipes on how to make your own starter from scratch, as well as how to make your own sourdough bread. And it only takes about a week to get your starter up and active to start making bread. Okay, I added a little bit more flour in there just because it had a little bit of a stick to it. And you want it to be wet to touch, but it was sticking too much to my hands. So there we go. And you're just going to knead it a couple of times. It's going to come together into a nice ball here. And then, as you can see, it's just got a little bit of a stick to it, but not where you can't work with it. And as it sits and hydrates, it will dry out some. But it's going to sit there and we're going to let it rest until we are ready to roll it out and cook it. But let me give my hands a quick rinse. There we go. And we're going to whip up our lamb meatballs so that they can start baking in the oven, and we'll add them into our soup. So I've got a pound of ground lamb, and we're going to start with one slice of bread. You want a soft bread, and we're going to kind of soak it with enough cream to where it will get soggy, but I don't want it to be dripping and oozing full of it. So you're going to use probably around 2 tablespoons to 1/4 of a cup, but enough to make it a paste, because we're going to make a panade here, which is going to be the binder for our meatballs. Here we go. So I've got my egg, or not my bread, soaking up that milk, and then we're going to add in 1 egg. And so my rule of thumb is 1 egg, 1 slice of bread per pound of meat. And then we're going to add in our spices, and then we'll add in our meat. So to season up our meatballs, I'm going to use some dried sage, because I find that lamb and sage just work wonderful together. I'm going to put in about a teaspoon of dried sage. We're going to put in a teaspoon and a half of garlic salt. So a couple good shakes. About a teaspoon of onion powder. A half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. Here we go. And then we're going to just cut up a little bit of green onions and throw in some green onions in here as well. And this will just add a nice fresh onion flavor to it, a pop of color to it. We'll just snip some in. We're going to also garnish our soup with a little bit of green onion at the end, but we'll use some of this in our meatballs. And I'm just making nice thin snips. You could use chives if you had chives as well. Or you could finely mince up an onion as well. Like, you just need about 1/4 of a cup for it. Our little lamb meatballs, which is going to go in our soup today, which is kind of a fall kind of pumpkin broth soup with some sweet potatoes and carrots and whatnot.
You have a question? Could you use ground beef instead?
You could use ground beef. It would be a different flavor profile. I would recommend using either ground pork or chicken, As well, beef has kind of got a stronger flavor, while pork and ground chicken are both more mild, which will let the seasoning go on. But you could use ground beef. It just would be a slightly different flavor profile. Okay, we're going to add in our pound of ground lamb. And then we're going to mix all of this together to make our meatball base. There we go. And now really the only way to get in with the meatballs is you got to go in with your hand. So I'm going to first go in, kind of put my meat to the side, and we're going to squeeze this milk and this bread mixture together to make a nice little paste for it. And then we're going to mix that all together.
You have a question? What does lamb taste like?
Lamb it's got a slightly gamey taste to it. It's similar to, I want to say it's similar to ground beef, but it's not really. It has this gamier, nice taste to it with, that kind of heartier flavor that beef has over, I feel like pork and chicken is much lighter and fair, but there is a gaminess to it that I think pairs well with earthier, flavors. With it, like with the sage and everything like that. And which is why I would say like a ground pork or ground chicken might work a little bit better, because ground beef is more overpowering in that beef flavor, where those spices won't necessarily shine through as much. Okay, and now we're just going to squeeze this kind of through our fingers to make a nice kind of paste, our meatball base to it. And that bread and egg mixture is going to be the binder that holds our meatballs together, keeps them nice and tender and moist. And I really like that over using breadcrumbs. Now for this, we want to make little meatballs because this is a little bit of a soup. And so you don't want your meatballs so big that you can't eat them easily. Now, just remember, they will shrink up just a little bit, as they cook, especially like with meat, they has more fat, they season. And lamb is, it's a very tender meat, but it has a slightly higher fat content. So these will shrink up. So I'm going to make just little tiny, mini gumball size pieces here. And I will say a pound will get me quite a few of these meatballs, which will be lovely in this soup on here. And then we'll bake these up in the oven. I do have my oven set for 350 because that's what we're going to cook our cookies at. But these will bake up wonderfully in there as well. Here we go. And again, because we're putting this in a soup, don't make your meatballs too large or they won't be easily eaten. Because you're going to just be using a spoon to eat it. Here we go. And we'll roll these guys up. And also because these are so little, these are going to bake up pretty quickly. The smaller your meatball, the faster it will bake up. So you want to just be careful not to over bake it, because that over baking is going to dry out your meatball. Here we go. I feel like I've already rolled out so many, but I still have a good amount of base. And then after we get done rolling these out, we'll pop these in the oven, and then we're going to work on, actually, we'll chop up an onion, start sauteing our onion for our soup, and then get it caramelized. That will give us a really nice broth. And then we will work on our cookies, whip those up because they don't take too long to make. They're going to be a lovely pumpkin brown sugar cookie. So they'll be nice and chewy, but have that lovely, all those fall flavors in it.
And do you have any plans for dinner?
I haven't figured out exactly what we're doing for dinner tonight, although I will be baking up a loaf of sourdough, maybe two, because I actually have my pumpkin loaf. I whipped up a pumpkin loaf, and actually like a savory pumpkin loaf. So last time I made a pumpkin sourdough, I did a little bit of a sweet twist on it. This one I made just a regular kind of plain pumpkin. So, and then I have a regular traditional loaf. So I will be baking up some sourdough. I just haven't decided exactly what we're going to have for dinner tonight. We'll see. I'll see how much my children influence me. If Evie has her way, she's going to say something that is in the family of spaghetti and meatballs, because that's always what she asks for every single time. But we'll have to see this last little bit. So it looks like we've got a good amount of meatballs here. I'm gonna wash my hands real quick, and then we can get these popped up in the oven. Here we go. And okay, let's get these in the oven. I'm gonna just bake these at 350 for about 10 or so minutes on here because they are little. Here we go. So I'm just gonna pop them up there, but when we put they'll pretty much, I'll probably take them out when we put our cookies in. Meatballs, you've got a good amount of time before they overcook, so I don't need to set the timer on that one. But let's get our onion diced up first before I forget about it, because we want to have a chance for it to caramelize. So I'm going to put in about, I would say a tablespoon of olive oil in my Dutch oven here. We're going to turn it on to a medium high, around a 7. And then I have one nice yellow onion that we're going to dice up and saute. We're going to have kind of a good onion flavor to the soup and broth, because not only are we using the yellow onion, but we're going to use a leek. And then we're also going to use some green onions as well. So just lovely oniony notes in it, which I think will pair really well with kind of our pumpkin-based broth and the sage and stuff like that. They'll complement each other. So just a smaller dice on here, so you get nice, good little onion bits in every bite. I wasn't sure what to make for lunch today, but I was over at my mom's house earlier, and she goes, I would really love a soup. So I was like, you know what? We can make soup for lunch.
Do you have a question? How was dinner last night, and which sausage was the best?
So dinner was awesome. It was really, really delicious, and it was just kind of really fun. And I would have to say the Weisswurst was the best. The bratwurst tastes like, kind of a traditional bratwurst. And the knockwurst was like a mix between like a kielbasa and a hot dog. So I really liked the Weisswurst because it was a very seasoned sausage, which just had a great flavor to it. So that was my favorite. I think my husband agreed. I think that was his favorite as well on there. And the kids, they all like the knockwurst that kind of tastes like a hot dog. And it's a mix between like a Polish sausage and a hot dog. But funny that that's always their favorite. Let's let those saute up. Let's put it over here. I'm going to wash the little onion flavor off my hands. And let's start working on our cookie dough. I'm going to just move my dough over here. That's going to be for our naan here in just a little bit. But for this, we're going to be using a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks. Make sure your butter is, softened, room temperature, because it's going to cream a little bit better. So this is partially softened, so won't cream as good as if I had left it out earlier. But you know me, I'm never certain what I'm going to make until right before I decide. Okay. So we've got our cup of butter here. We're going to whip it just a few seconds with our egg beater. You could use a stand mixer, or, go right ahead. Use some good old elbow grease for this. But I feel like my hand mixer just works well.
Marla sent you this.
Oh, well, thank you, Marla. We appreciate that. I'm going to just whip this up just a little bit. There we go. Okay. Okay, and now we are going to add in our brown sugar. Now, this recipe has a lot of brown sugar in it because this is kind of like a sugar cookie, but it's like a pumpkin brown sugar cookie. We are going to put in 1 3/4 cup of brown sugar. So I'm using, this is a 1/2 cup marker, so we'll have to do it a couple of times. So that's 1/2 cup.
Do you have a question? Do you have a recipe for a butternut squash soup?
I do. I actually have several recipes for butternut squash soup. You'll have to just go dive through the videos because I've made, I think, 3 already this fall with different kind of flavors. I did a butternut squash and leek soup, and then I did a curried butternut squash soup, and then a butternut sauce and brown butter and sage soup. So that was 1, 2, 3. This one's going to be a 1/2 for 1 3/4 cup of brown sugar. So you'll have to go through there. I know for my members, I posted a couple recipe cards for that, but the videos, I do have videos for everybody because I do love a good butternut squash. In fact, I have a butternut squash over there, and I was thinking about making butternut squash soup today, but I decided to do something a little different. Let me give my onions a quick stir here. I can smell them. They're getting lovely. I'm going to turn this down to about a 5 now that my Dutch oven is nice and hot. There we go. And then we're going to cream our brown sugar and our butter together here. There you go. Now again, soft room temperature butter is going to work a little bit better than colder butter. I'm going to have to, got some chunks stuck in my egg beaters here. Let's pop these guys out. There we go. And I guess I didn't soften them quite long enough, but that's okay. And then we're going to add in 1 egg and a 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree and a teaspoon of vanilla. And those are kind of all of our wet ingredients for our dish here. Just breaking up that butter in here. Okay. Let's get our egg and our pumpkin in here, and those will mix up a little bit nicer.
I do have a question. Do you know if you have to re-season the Hexclad pans?
The Hexclad pans, you do not need to season them. They don't have a cast iron base on it. It's kind of like, it's, you know, a non-stick on there, but it's not cast iron. So you don't need to season them, which is lovely. So they're really easy to clean and like really easy to just like use. I love mine. I've had them for about 2 years now, and they work wonderful. We're going to add in our teaspoon of vanilla extract. I do have my cast iron pans in my Amazon storefront, the ones that I have, because I have 4 of them. I've got my griddle pan here, which I love, and then I have the 12-inch, the 10-inch, and the 8-inch frying pans. Okay, we're going to use a 1/2 a cup of our pumpkin puree. I have a little bit left over, and then we're going to use some from the other day in here. So last night I made a big pumpkin loaf, and I used up almost a whole can. So a 1/2 cup, and this is going to make for our pumpkin brown sugar cookies. Let me grab a spoon out. And again, I'm going to just eyeball what I think a 1/2 cup is. So I figured I didn't have enough in here for a 1/2 cup. I have got about 1/4 of a cup in here. Now you want to make sure it's pumpkin puree. You can use canned, you can use fresh. Just don't use pumpkin pie filling. Pumpkin pie filling has already like sugar and sweetness added to it. There we go. And so it will mess with like kind of the texture and everything of your baking. So we've got our 1 egg, our 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and a 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree. We're going to mix this into our butter. So we have 1 cup of butter in here and 1 3/4 cups of brown sugar. Here we go. And you can see it's going to come together nicely. Beautiful. We're just going to whip this all the way together here. And then we'll add in our spices, our baking powder, baking soda, or no baking powder, just baking soda, and finally our flour. There we go. Beautiful. Let me give our onions a quick stir over here. I want them to get nice and caramelized so that they add this great flavor to our soup here. We're doing kind of a, our lamb meatball soup with some leeks and spinach, carrots. And then I'm going to use some of my pumpkin puree to make this kind of pumpkin broth, not a bisque, but a broth, which I think will be absolutely lovely. Let's get to our spices here. On here, we'll add those in. We need about 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. I like to use just good old heaping teaspoons. So they're a little bit more, but.
You have a question. What's the difference between baking soda and baking powder?
So baking powder has your reactive agents added in. So it's actually baking soda with typically like cream of tartar or alum, and then like a base, like a cornstarch or whatnot, which causes the chemical reaction to leaven it. So it's a complete leavening agent, where baking soda is just like the basic part of it, not the acid part. So it needs other ingredients to react to leaven. And so we've got 2 teaspoons of our cinnamon in there. And we're going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. Now, I don't go over on the ginger because ginger's got a strong flavor to it. And then we're going to do about a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. So just kind of fill it up partially, mix it in there. It's going to give our wonderful little flavors to it. And then we're going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You can already smell these wonderful scents. And then a whole teaspoon of baking soda. We're going to mix those in, and then we'll add our flour into it. But those are going to give this just wonderful flavor to our cookies, give you that nice fall flavor to it. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. And then our last ingredient that we're going to add in there is our flour, but let's give our onions a quick little toss over here. And you know what? Before we add those in, I'm actually going to kind of chop up let's give our carrots a quick peel. We'll chop them up in there so that they can start sauteing as well. We're going to be using sweet potatoes and carrots kind of as our base. Those sweet potatoes, I think, are going to just add a nice, lovely flavor, kind of a sweetness to it, which will go well with the pumpkin kind of broth in there and gives you a nice little base veggie. There we go. And then we'll cut off our tops and bottoms. But I've got 4 carrots here, although 2 of them are pretty skinny. So like 3 good sized carrots. And always peel your carrots when you're using whole ones, because this outer skin is very dry and it like kind of has a very earthy flavor to it. So giving it a good peel is going to just have the nice sweet flesh of the carrot in there. Beautiful. We've got our onions. I'm going to turn this down to a 3 now. They've got this nice, beautiful caramelization coming onto it. We've got this lovely browning to it. So that's going to bring out its natural sweetness. Okay, let's take our tops off. Let's take our bottoms, and then we're going to dice these up and we'll throw them in there. And we'll let them have a good saute. Carrots take, a little bit longer to cook up than sweet potatoes. They're firmer vegetable. So that's why I'm going to add them in now. Sweet potatoes, they are very firm when you cut them, but as they cook, they're actually a very tender vegetable. So I don't want to overcook them or they'll get mushy. Here we go. Add these in here. We'll let them start to saute. Beautiful. And then let's add in our flour, and then we're going to work on our cookies. So let me see. I grabbed another bag of flour over here because I knew mine was running low. We need 1.5 or 2.5 cups of flour for this recipe. So we're going to add in, we've got 1, and we're using just good old all-purpose flour. 2, and it looks like I actually have a half measuring cup in here.
How long do the meatballs cook for?
Just around 10 or so minutes. I'm actually going to go grab them out here in just a few for it because it's been about time. I thought I could time it perfectly to have the cookies going, but I think I need to grab them out in just a second. We'll mix these up, and then I'm going to go grab our meatballs. They're nice and small, so they're going to cook up. Our meatballs are going to cook up faster than if you do a big fat meatball. So let's get this mixed in here. Now with our cookies, you want to just mix these until that flour is combined. Over mixing them will give you a firmer cookie. So just until you see that flour is nice and combined, which is right here. And then I'll use a spatula to kind of mix in the rest. Okay. I'm going to go take our meatballs out of the oven here. That way they can sit and rest, and we'll throw them in our soup. Again, they're nice small meatballs, so they cook up really fast. You could definitely make them bigger and do them as like a main piece. They just need a little bit longer to cook up. I will say the best way to tell when your meatballs are done is you just give them a good tap, and as long as they're firm, you'll know that they're nice and done. If they still have a give to them, a good squish, they just need to cook longer. With little ones, these cook up pretty fast in there.
Yo has a question for you.
What's for dinner tonight? I am not 100% sure yet. I'm still deciding. I know that there will be sourdough bread. That's all I can tell you. But we'll have to see where the wind takes us. But we've got our lamb meatballs that we seasoned with green onions, sage. We made a lovely panade using some cream and egg and bread to kind of bind them together. Okay, let's get a spatula here. We're going to give this a nice kind of mix around. Beautiful. And this is our cookie dough. And this cookie dough, the last thing we do to it is we are going to roll it through some sugar, and then we bake it up. And you bake it at 350, and it cooks up really fast. Now, of course, still a little bite. Delicious. Okay, let's get a baking sheet out. Always, always, always cover it with some parchment paper. I can't believe I waited so long to make the conversion to parchment paper, but it is so much easier, especially with cooking. It just cooks so evenly and really easy cleanup.
You have a question. Do you have a good Swedish meatball recipe?
I do have a good Swedish meatball recipe. It is one that has been passed down through my family. I do believe I've made it a couple videos of it. But as you know, my mom is from Sweden, and so I have her recipe, and it is one of our favorite. I always make it during like Santa Lucia, and then at Christmas during our smorgasbord, and a couple times throughout the year. So I'll have to dig for it, but I do have a couple videos of the Swedish meatball because it is so good and it is so different than an American meatball. You're gonna just grab a nice little ball here, and we're just gonna roll it through the sugar, and then we'll pop it on here. Now, you could season up your sugar if you want an extra little punch, like kind of like a snickerdoodle that has cinnamon in it. You could do that if you wanted to. I like to just keep it the regular sugar because we do have this lovely spice already in. Take a little bit, that's a little big, in our cookie. Now, these are going to be soft and chewy and wonderful for it. So we'll just roll these off, and then we're going to bake them up. This makes a good amount of cookies on here, and they're just, you know, you've got that brown sugar in it, so it has this kind of nice molasses rich flavor to it. Here, I'm just gonna, let's say we can do 4. I always try to make sure they aren't too close that they'll run into each other for this. And again, we have a whole half cup of pumpkin puree a puree in here. So again, there's just some really great fall flavors in here. And then the brown sugar, it all complements each other. We use cinnamon and cloves and ground ginger. So just lovely flavors.
I have a question. Does this dough freeze down well?
The dough, if you want to freeze it down, you definitely do. Just make sure you've got it in an airtight container, and then it will, make sure you defrost it. Or you could pre-shape your balls and kind of roll them in sugar, and then defrost them when you're ready to bake them. It actually works well. The cookies freeze down really well as well. My little trick was when you're going to freeze them down, just throw in a slice of bread into your bag when you freeze it down. If you've pre-made the cookies, it helps kind of absorb any extra moisture, which prevents them from getting a little bit of freezer burn. Okay. Now your dough, as you can see, it's got a slight stick to it. Once you roll it in the sugar, it's much easier to kind of handle. But you don't want to add more flour to it, because that's going to give you a denser, drier cookie. So you want it to have this little bit of a stick to it. And that's from that pumpkin puree in there. Here we go. And I think, let's get our last little ones out. We can get these in, and we can keep working on ours. Whoop, almost lost that guy. Beautiful. And then we're going to work on the next part of our soup. We've right now got our onions and our carrots kind of cooking up. We are going to throw in our sweet potatoes. We'll get our leeks going, make our broth, and finish cooking up our naan, which we have sitting right here hydrating. So good stuff coming. Okay. We're just going to do our first batch here. I'm going to just leave enough room through it. Always try not to overcrowd.
You have a question on what type of cookies?
These are pumpkin brown sugar cookies. So they're like a nice chewy cookie that has notes of brown sugar and pumpkin and all your delicious fall spices. These do not take very long to cook up. Let me give my carrots and onions a good stir here. Beautiful. You see, we've got this lovely caramelization going on our onions here. It's going to bring nice depth to our soup. We've got our first batch of cookies going in. So we've got our pumpkin brown sugar cookies. We rolled them in just plain sugar. You could throw in extra cinnamon if you want to. And we're going to pop these in the oven. Just even those out. And these are going to bake for 10 minutes at 350. Sometimes they take a little bit longer, but I find 10 is perfect. You want to make sure you don't overcook a cookie. An overcooked cookie is a dry cookie.
Any question? How was vacation, and what all did you do?
Vacation was wonderful. The weather was beautiful. We had so much fun. The first day, we got there Sunday, and we just got to our campsite, set up, camp, and really enjoyed the kind of nature. We were in Townsend, Tennessee, which is a quieter part of the Smokies. And so we just kind of enjoyed nature there. Then we drove to Gatlinburg, and we went to Anakeesta, which is this outdoor adventure park, which is actually really awesome. They had this nice kind of, it's called Bavarian Festival, but it was like a German food festival with like German foods and then, beer from local breweries. It was lovely. So we did that. We did the high ropes courses, the bridges, the mountain coasters and whatnot. The best thing though, that was really awesome. We were doing this high kind of tree suspended bridge through the treetops, and 3 black bears were exploring underneath us, walking around. So we got to see actual bears there, which was awesome. And then we went to, Dollywood, of course. You got to go to Dollywood when you're in Gatlinburg. It's a lovely theme park. It's got that old-fashioned feel to it. although it's definitely gotten bigger over the years. We've been going there for a long time. But I think it's becoming more and more popular just as Tennessee is. And so we spent the day there, which was lovely. The weather was great. The kids enjoyed the rides. Teddy had so much fun. He loved it. Jack, who I thought was going to love the rides because he loved the rides when we went to Holiday World in July, did not like the rides, but he had so much fun. We got him some bubble wands and he just played with the bubble ones and he had fun watching everybody else. Okay, we've got our first sweet potato we're throwing in there. I'm going to cut up my second one, add it in there. And then on our kind of our third day, we went to this Smoky Mountain Heritage Museum, which they had like some just really cool, like historical old buildings and artifacts from, the kind of the mountain ages time and how they used to live in the Smokies, 100 years ago. Had a lot of fun kind of exploring that. The kids were really, really interested in it, which was awesome. Even Teddy thought it was really cool. Although we went to there was this old phone there, the wooden ones that the crank that you hold the little thing. And Evie was like, "Oh, is that the phone that you used when you were a kid?" And I was like, "I am not that old." But I was telling then when I said no, and she goes, "Oh, well, that must be what are my grandparents use." And I was like, "Nope, this is even before their time." But it was a lot of fun. And then honestly, I feel like the highlight of our vacation is we went to this Tuscaloosa Caves, big cave system. And we went on a tour through the caves and explored it. It was like about a mile and a half hike through this giant cave system, which was so awesome. Everybody really loved the caves, and it was really cool. And it was interesting, the history of it. They were like, it was explored by like a 6 and 8-year-old. They have just decided to go and explore it when they were in like the 1950s. So it was kind of interesting, but that was so much fun. And then we headed back home, and rest is history. But it was a great, great trip. Okay, we've got 2 sweet potatoes that we peeled and we diced up. We're going to kind of give this a quick saute, and then we are going to cover them with some nice little broth here. We're going to throw in some spices first, but let me get all of these onions that love to hide up at the edges here. I'm going to turn this up to about a 6 now, and we're going to let them saute. We will throw in our leeks after we get our broth in there because they don't need to saute up for it. And then towards the end, after it's been simmering for a while, that's when we're going to add in our meatballs. Okay, let's get our spices in here. I always like the spices to kind of cook up and heat up a little bit. So we've got some good old sage, which we have the sage and the lamb meatballs. So we're going to put about a teaspoon in here. And I feel like the sage plays really well with both the carrots and the sweet potatoes. So about a teaspoon of dried sage. You could use fresh. I would use closer to a tablespoon of fresh in there. And we're going to add in some dried oregano. I think this is a new one. We're going to add in about a teaspoon as well. A little bit more. And then we have some thyme. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of thyme. I'm going to add in 2 bay leaves. Okay. Since that was a half one. And about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. We're going to give this a good shake around. We're going to kind of coat these guys up with these spices. Let them kind of hit that oil that we had in there and that heat, which is going to really bring out those flavors. And then we're going to add in a little bit of tomato paste and pumpkin puree, which will kind of saute in there. But then when we add in our broth, that's going to kind of come together to form this lovely broth for it. Okay. And I think we'll have about just a few minutes left of about 4 minutes left of our cookies before they pop out. But let's get our pumpkin and our tomato paste in here, and then we can start cooking up our naan on there. Okay. For this, we're going to use about a tablespoon of tomato paste. Which is going to add just a great flavor and richness and acidity to the broth. And then we're going to add in a little bit more of the pumpkin. We're going to add in about, I want to say like a third cup of pumpkin. You don't need too much because I want this still to be a broth, not like a bisque, but that pumpkin will really meld well and give us a nice richness to our broth. We're going to saute it up, let that tomato paste and that pumpkin kind of hit the heat and get nice and rich. Make sure you kind of scrape the bottom of your pan in case there's any spices that got stuck on there. Beautiful. And then we're going to add in our broth. And so what I'm going to be using is water and vegetable bouillon, but you could also use straight up vegetable broth. I just prefer bouillon because I can add a bit more for flavor. We're going to start by adding in about a cup of our broth here, or our water. And then you're just going to mix it around, kind of make sure everything gets coated. It's going to make kind of a really rich, thick soup base in there because that tomato paste and that pumpkin puree is going to hydrate up here. Beautiful. And then we're going to add in another cup. Perfect.
You have a question. What type of broth are you making?
So this is kind of a pumpkin veggie broth. So I've got pumpkin and some tomato paste in it, and then we're going to add in some vegetable bouillon. So it's not going to be super thick like a bisque, but it's going to have this just lovely, kind of pumpkin notes to it. So it's a little bit different than what you see when you typically see pumpkin used, but I think it's going to be delicious. Here we go. I always just add it slowly so that it can all marry in really well together. Let's add in the rest now. And then we're going to get a nice big scoop of vegetable bouillon to our broth here. This is going to add our saltiness to it as well as kind of season it up. So good. You want a good heaping tablespoon of it. We'll mix it in. I'm going to bring this up and let it come to a nice boil, and we'll let it simmer, cook up those sweet potatoes, which actually are going to cook up fairly quickly because they've been sauteing, but sweet potatoes don't need a whole lot of time to cook up. Beautiful. Let's get that nice and high. And then I'm going to turn on my skillet over here and let it start warming up because we're going to roll out some of our naan. And then we'll be throwing, once we bring this to a boil, we're going to throw in our leeks. Okay. Let me just slide this. Let me wipe this down a little bit. We don't need any sugar in our naan. Okay, so here is our sourdough discard naan that we've had. We whipped up at the beginning, and it's nice and hydrating. If you see, you give it a little tap, and it has this nice little bounce back on it. So it's just nice and lovely and hydrated. And we're going to cut this guy up and portion it off. You can make little ones, big ones, however you want to make your pieces. I'm going to make this into 6 pieces. But before we get that rolling, let's go grab our cookies out of the oven because we've got our first kind of round going in. And here we go. So these are our pumpkin brown sugar cookies. And look how just beautiful they look. Perfect. They've got that nice kind of crinkle crust from the sugar on it. As they rest, they will sit down. They need to stay on the cookie sheet for at least 5 minutes before you transfer them to settle up. But these are going to be fantastic. I'm going to set these right here. And then I realize I have my timer going. So let me go turn that off. But beautiful. So this is our pumpkin brown sugar cookie. So we used a half cup of pumpkin in here, plus 1 3/4 cup of brown sugar. We use cinnamon, cloves, ginger in here, which is just going to give this a really lovely fall flavor. Okay, let's roll out our naan here. And the naan is we're gonna have it to be dipped in our soup. I feel like it just goes well with the lamb. Make sure, I think I need to flour my surface a little here. Just grab a little bit, and then we'll kind of cook these up. Once we get these kind of cooked up for it, we're going to cut up our leeks for our soup and get those kind of cooking as well in their broth. Here we go. So when you're rolling these out, you don't need to roll them as thin as a like a tortilla because a naan is kind of a nice fluffy based bread, but you do want it nice and thin. So we're going to put it on here. And you don't add butter or anything to the skillet. You keep it nice and hot on there. And that we already put about a 1/4 cup of oil in there, so that will cook it up. The first one, I will say, takes forever to cook because that skillet needs to heat up on there. But once it's hot, they cook really fast after that. Okay, let's give our broth a little stir here. I'm going to taste it up, see if I need to add any more spices or anything else to it. But do you see how we have this just lovely kind of like orangish red color to it? Beautiful. Maybe I'm going to say, let's do a little bit more vegetable bouillon. I've got the flavor, but I just want a pinch more saltiness to it. On here.
Could you just serve the lamb meatballs with the naan?
You could definitely serve the lamb meatballs with them on. That's probably how my husband wants it to eat it on there. He's not as big of a fan of pumpkin soup stuff as I am. But my mom wanted soup, and I like to surprise her. I'm a soup lady. I love it. But yes, you could totally, that's why I said you could make these meatballs bigger, and then you could actually kind of make it like a little sandwich, put your meatballs in there, and you could make like a lovely tzatziki sauce or like a garlic aioli to throw in there. Okay, beautiful. Give that a mix. Now we're going to kind of cut up our leek here. We got to give it a quick rinse, but let me grab my spatula out to check on this naan here. Or let it cook. Beautiful. It needs, again, a hot minute for it. Okay, since leeks are a fairly dirty vegetable, even though they can look like they're nice and clean, we got to make sure we give it a good rest, because when I cut in here, I'm going to show you guys, this is not something that you can just cut up and throw in. They always have bits of sand and dirt hiding between these layers. Do you see that? So while it looks like it's nice and clean on the outside, leeks are very dirty, very sandy. So always make sure you wash them thoroughly after you cut them up. You can't wash them before because it's really impossible to get between all of these layers. So cut it up, put it in a colander, and rinse it well so that you can get all of that sand off. I'm going to throw these two outer bits off because they're a little bit dry.
And what does the leek taste like?
A leek is like a very mellow onion. It has just, it's really lovely. Think of like a floral onion. That's kind of how I can describe it. It's got very aromatic but very mild onion flavor. So it's not astringent at all. It's more mellow than like a green onion. But they're absolutely lovely, especially in like a vichyssoise, which is a potato and leek soup. I love that. I'm going to rinse these things, but I made this vichyssoise kind of themed soup, but I used buttercup squash as the base for it with my leeks, and it was amazing. And not butternut, but buttercup squash. Okay, giving these a good rinse through. Another great way to kind of clean up your leeks is to put them in a salad spinner and spin them out as well. Okay, but you see how our naan here has fluffed up? We're going to flip it over. We've got a light browning on it, but after this, the first one, because it's kind of the skillet wasn't quite as hot, they will get this perfect little thing. So the underneath will actually be perfect for it. And then we'll coat it with a little bit of butter. Okay, now that our soup here is got a nice boil to it, I'm going to just check out my sweet potatoes, feel how they're feeling. They're getting pretty soft here. We're going to throw in our leeks, and we're going to let them kind of simmer in our broth as well. The last thing that we're going to throw in are our meatballs, because we don't want to risk when we stir the soup breaking up our meatballs, but we'll throw them in for the last like minute before. Here we go. kind of coat this up, but it's going to be lovely. We've got these carrots in here, the sweet potatoes. You could also use butternut squash instead of sweet potatoes. You could cube it up in there. Sweet potatoes hold their foam a little bit better than butternut squash. Okay, we're going to let those guys simmer here. Let's check how this guy is going. Beautiful. So here's what I was talking about, how you're going to get this lovely kind of tortilla type edge to it on here. We're going to let it, we'll coat that up with some butter here in just a second. But let me get this one rolled out and cooking. And just roll it nice and thin. Sometimes I do these in like little Naan dippers where they're little small ones. Sometimes I'll roll them into like a square to make it more like a sandwich for it. But they're really soft and malleable dough that just cooks up really well. And they're so tender and juicy inside. It's like a very soft bread. Let me grab my butter here. Very crucial when you're making naan. Take some room temperature butter. Just rub it over, and I'll flip it over. And we're going to do it on both sides. This is going to help keep that outer texture of our naan nice and soft. My husband stole a cookie. Is the cookie good? He loves the cookie, so that's good. I always warn him, he always sits there and half the time he does not wait long enough and he burns himself on the cookies. But he tested this time. Okay, let's see how this sweet potato, oh, beautiful. I can already break through my sweet potato with my spoon, so it's almost ready here. So the great way to check, the same thing as like anytime I need to check a potato in a soup to see if it's, nice and soft, is just pull up like a nice big one. And if you can kind of smush through it with your fork all the way, you'll know it's ready. So you can see I'm almost completely there, which once my fork goes through quickly, then it'll be nice and soft and fluffy. Okay, let's check this guy out. Oh, another cookie has disappeared, and he's going for his third cookie. Luckily, I still have a half a batch of cookies, actually a little bit more to whip up. I need to remember to store my cookies over there so that the cameraman does not eat them all. Okay, let's prep up our green onions, which we're going to toss in our soup at the very end. We're going to throw our meatballs in here in just a second, and then we'll have a handful of spinach as well. You could definitely use kale if you wanted to, but I used kale in my soup yesterday, so we're using spinach today. We're going to add in our green onions. The green onions we're going to add in at the very end because you want that nice, fresh, bright onion flavor to stay. We already have we have the yellow onion and the leeks in there, so this has got lots of onion notes to it. There we go.
Question. Can you go over how you make the naan?
Yes. The naan is a pretty simple recipe. I start with a cup of my sourdough discard, and then we added in a half a cup of yogurt, or you can use sour cream, and then 6 tablespoons of water, a fourth a cup of oil, and then I use 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and you kind of mix all of those ingredients together. And then you add in 3 cups of flour, and you knead those up until they're kind of all incorporated. And then you mix it together. You let the dough sit. That's a very important step, is letting the dough sit for about 10 to 15 minutes to hydrate, and then you can start working with it. But this is the best stuff, guys. Homemade naan is, once you've had it, it's so hard to go back to store-bought. Okay, let's get our meatballs in our soup. Let's see. Yep, that's cool enough to touch. So with these, we're just going to pop them in here. Now, again, you could also just eat them up with our things. I'm going to make sure I save. My husband was like, you better save some out because he wants them not in the soup. Yeah, it's funny. My husband and I have very different flavor profiles and preferences, but we actually complement each other well because I'm like a sides girl. I love all the little vegetable sides, and he is like a meat, bread, meat, potato.
Yeah, question. Do you have a non recipe that doesn't involve discard?
I have one, but it is not as good. So I haven't, I will say, and it was everyone loved it until I started to make my naan without the discard. And so I will say it is, you know, it is a very similar recipe, you know, just slightly different, but the discard adds like just a better flavor to it. But I do have it. I had to sit there and I'm like, I have it written down somewhere where I'll have to go look for it. But I have made it a couple of times. Like I recently made it because I didn't have any discard to spare on one day and we were having naan and everyone was like, this isn't your normal naan. And I was like, this is the naan I used to make all the time that you guys loved. Okay, let's got our meatballs in here. As you can see, I'm going to pull up a sweet potato, make sure it's nice and tender on here. Whoops, popped it away. So still needs a few more minutes, but again, we're almost there. Let's add in our spinach. I'm going to turn this up nice and high. So again, I'm using spinach, but you could use kale if you wanted to. With baby spinach, you don't even need to chop it up. A little bit of spinach, this might seem like a lot. This is going to shrink into nothingness. Spinach wilts up very, very quickly, so there's not really much left in it. But we're going to mix this in. I always like to add it for a touch of greenery. And then we're going to be about ready to serve up here because our sweet potatoes need about 1 more minute to cook. And we can serve up. I won't make you guys stay with me as I make all of the naan for my kids. That's their favorite part is the naan. And it's really delicious with hummus. Okay, let's let that simmer there. And let's see how this guy is. But just, you can see how nice and fat this is, even though we rolled it out pretty thin. So it's just lovely. Coat it again with our butter. And it's one of those things where you don't put any butter or anything on your skillet. That first one, you know how we rolled it out and it took forever. Once your skillet's nice and hot, and I'm using, this is a griddle pan, but you can use a regular frying pan. You don't have to have like a plain skillet for it. But you just want a dry pan. You don't want to add any fat into it because those will just burn. But you keep it, I have it over a medium right now. And you just let it cook up and it kind of just steams up and heats it. You can't do it too high or you'll burn it. Okay, let me taste my soup here. And then I think we're going to be ready to serve up. I'm going to steal a piece of sweet potato, see if it's nice and tender. Beautiful. Let me add in my fresh green onion for our little final kind of topping on here. And I can taste the lamb from the meatballs. That flavor has really soaked in already. Beautiful. And again, we have this nice, rich, kind of orangish, reddish broth, and that's from the pumpkin puree and a little bit of that tomato paste. Okay, let's get our plate and get ready to serve up everything. Just want to make sure I don't burn that. Okay, I'll slide this out. The meatballs I can see are already disappearing off of the pan. Okay. Get ready. Let me flip this guy over. Beautiful. And of course, which I love to put on almost every soup, get my yellow grater out, a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan cheese will make wonders here. Okay, let's get ready to serve up our lunch here. Let me grab a ladle here. I'm going to turn off my soup since it's nice and ready, and we don't want those green onions to overcook. Okay, so for lunch today, we have our sweet potato and lamb soup with a pumpkin and tomato broth to it. We added leeks, onions, spinach, and our homemade lamb meatballs that we seasoned with sage in there. So just a nice earthy flavor. We're going to serve it with our pillowy, soft naan. Just feel how soft and fluffy that is. And then, of course, for dessert, we have our pumpkin brown sugar cookies. And just look how soft and chewy and delicious these guys are, made with a half a cup of pumpkin puree. Well, guys, oh, and I almost forgot. Got to top your soup with Parmesan cheese. This is going to melt into it and it's going to add just the deliciousness to it. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link and search for what we made. So we've got our lamb meatball and sweet potato soup, our pumpkin brown sugar cookies, and you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my griddle pans, my Dutch ovens, my knives, my cutting boards, all the different things I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.